September 10th, 1944, Northern Germany. The air is cold, sharp enough to bite through wool and bone. A layer of fog creeps low across the barbed wire of Stalag Luft 3, one of the Luftwaffe's prisoner of war camps, a sprawling maze of wooden huts, guard towers, and searchlights that cut through the mist like knives. Inside, hundreds of Allied airmen stir restlessly, their breath clouding in the dawn chill. Among them walks Lieutenant Jack Churchill, Royal Air Force. His uniform, now tattered and faded, still carries the faint ghost of blue beneath grime and months of captivity. His boots crunch against the frozen earth as he's led back from the roll call. Around him, murmurs of escape plans hum beneath the surface, whispered like prayers. Everyone in this camp dreams of the same impossible thing: getting out. Jack had already tried once before, digging under the wire, only to be caught in a hail of rifle beams and dogs. They'd beaten him for that, but not enough to break him. He was a pilot, a man who had once ruled the skies. Now he stared at that same sky through barbed wire, every sunrise a taunt. The guards were on edge. Rumors had spread that the Allies were advancing from the west, the Soviets from the east. The Reich was bleeding. But for the men inside, it didn't matter. The fences still stood, the guns still pointed inward. And the cold, it was endless. In the dim light of Barrack 12, Jack huddled close to a tiny contraband map drawn on scraps of paper. France, Belgium, the Rhine. Allied lines. He had traced them over and over until he could see them when he closed his eyes. Across the table sat Flight Lieutenant Peter Forbes, a fellow RAF officer, thin as a rail but sharp-eyed. "You'll never make it alone," Peter whispered, glancing toward the door. "Maybe not," Jack muttered, "but I'll die trying before I rot here." Outside, a siren wailed, a low, mournful drone that sent the prisoners to the ground instinctively. Overhead, the distant rumble of engines rolled through the clouds. Allied bombers. Jack looked up through the window slats, eyes narrowing. Somewhere up there, men like him were still fighting. Still free. That night, he lay awake, listening to the rhythmic crunch of boots as guards made their rounds. The moon was a silver coin caught in the wire. His mind wouldn't stop turning, the maps, the shifts, the weak spots in the fence. He'd studied every inch of this camp for months. And now, with chaos creeping closer to Germany's borders, the guards had grown sloppy. The outer patrols were thinner, the dogs less vigilant. He waited, patient as stone. By dawn he'd made up his mind. It was a madness, not yet. It was purpose, pure, sharp purpose. He began quietly trading favors. Cigarettes for information. A spoon for a compass fragment. He watched the German sentries from afar, when they smoked, when they argued, when they looked away. And in a shed near the perimeter, he spotted something that made his pulse quicken, a maintenance gate, its hinges rusted and its padlock ancient. "You're not serious," Peter hissed when Jack showed him. "Dead serious," Jack said, eyes cold. "If I can get past the outer fence, I can make for a town." "Maybe an airfield," Peter scoffed. "You can't just steal a plane, Jack." Jack looked at him, dead calm. "Watch me." As night fell again, the wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke and diesel from somewhere beyond the walls. The guards were huddled inside their towers, shivering and muttering about the Allied advance. The world was collapsing around them. They just didn't know how soon. Jack moved like a shadow. He crawled beneath the barrack floorboards, clutching his makeshift compass and the tiny piece of wire he'd sharpened into a pick. Outside, the watchlights swept in slow arcs, mechanical and predictable. He waited for the rhythm. 1, 2, pause, and then slipped from the crawlspace, hugging the frost-covered ground. The first fence was 20 meters ahead. He could feel his heart pounding against his ribs. Every breath came out white, every sound amplified by fear. A guard coughed somewhere in the dark. The dogs barked once, then quieted. He reached the gate. His hands trembled as he slid the wire into the lock. One wrong move and the alarm would light the night. He worked carefully, the click of metal against metal echoing in his ears louder than any gunshot. Then, snap. The lock gave way. He froze. No movement. No shouts. Slowly he pushed the gate open just enough to slip through. Beyond the wire, the world was silent. A vast, frozen wasteland under a moonlit sky. Freedom. Real, terrifying freedom. He didn't look back. Jack Churchill, RAF, was gone. The air outside the wire felt unreal. Too open, too wide. After months behind fences, the world itself seemed to breathe differently. Frost glittered across the flat, endless fields north of Berlin, each step crunching softly beneath Jack's worn boots. The cold gnawed through his uniform, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled twice, faint, muffled by fog. He dropped to the ground instantly, heart hammering. A searchlight swept the outer perimeter of the camp behind him, a long, pale finger probing the mist. For a moment, he thought he saw it pause, linger, then move on. Jack waited, face pressed into the frozen mud until the beam vanished. Only then did he rise and push forward, moving in quick bursts between patches of tall grass. His every sense was sharpened to a knife's edge. The distant murmur of guards, the bark of a dog carried by the wind, the smell of burning coal from some unseen village. He had no map now, only his memory, and one goal. Head west, toward the Rhine, toward the Allies. By dawn, his fingers were numb, his breath shallow. He found a ditch lined with frost-hardened reeds and collapsed into it, pulling his thin coat tighter. Around him, the countryside was eerily still. The only movement came from the faint trails of smoke rising over farm roofs in the far distance. When he finally stirred, the sun was already low, a pale orange disk in a sky the color of lead. He risked movement toward a small cluster of barns near the tree line. The closer he got, the clearer the sound of machinery became, a steady hum and the clank of tools. A German airfield perhaps, or a maintenance post. Jack crouched behind a hedge, peering through the branches. What he saw made his pulse quicken, a small Luftwaffe outpost, barely guarded, with a Fiesler Phi 156 Storch parked near a hangar. Its high wings folded slightly inward, its long spindly landing gear half buried in mud. A liaison aircraft, used for reconnaissance and officer transport. It was perfect, slow, maneuverable, capable of short takeoffs. For Jack, it might as well have been a miracle. He watched for nearly an hour. Only 2 mechanics were visible, working sluggishly, their breath steaming in the air. Jack's mind began calculating almost automatically. Distance, wind, visibility, time to engine start. He whispered to himself, almost prayer-like, "If I can reach her. If I can get her off the ground?" He needed fuel, tools, and a distraction. As the sun slipped behind the trees, he crept toward the outer fence. It wasn't much, just a waist-high barbed barrier meant to deter civilians, not saboteurs. He slid over it, careful not to snag his coat. From this distance, he could hear the murmur of German voices and the faint crackle of a radio inside the hangar. He moved closer, crouched low, steady breathing, every movement deliberate. Near a stack of fuel drums he found his chance. A loose valve hissed softly, the faint smell of aviation gasoline drifting into the air. He unscrewed it just enough, let the liquid dribble down into the mud. Then he waited, crouched behind a tire. A mechanic shouted something, a complaint, irritation. When he came closer to inspect, Jack struck a match. A single flicker of orange ignited the puddle. The fire caught quickly, racing along the trail of fuel, then erupting into a sudden whoosh. The Germans shouted, panicking, rushing for buckets and sandbags. Jack didn't wait. He bolted from his hiding place, sprinting toward the Storch as smoke billowed behind him. He climbed into the cockpit, breath ragged, heart slamming in his chest. The controls were in German, but he trained on enough enemy craft simulations to know the basics. Throttle, mixture, magneto. He flipped the switches, praying to every god he knew. "Come on, you beautiful machine. Come on!" The propeller coughed once, then again, sputtering like a dying animal. Outside, shouts grew louder. The sentry had spotted him. A rifle cracked, the bullet slicing through the canopy glass. Shards flying past his face. He ducked instinctively, slammed the throttle forward. The engine roared to life, propeller spinning. The Storch lurched forward. Another shot rang out, this one punching a hole through the fuselage behind him. He didn't care. The aircraft bounced over the muddy field, the tail lifting slightly. 50 meters. 70. He yanked back on the control stick and felt the ground fall away beneath him. For the first time in a year, Jack Churchill was airborne. He let out a raw, triumphant yell that was swallowed instantly by the wind. Below him, the Germans were shrinking, waving their arms, their gunfire fading to nothing. The landscape opened up. Rivers, forests, tiny towns scarred by bomb craters. The horizon glowed faintly red from distant fires. But his joy was tempered by a brutal truth. He had no idea where he was. The fuel gauge was barely a quarter full. The compass needle shook erratically. He was flying blind over Nazi Germany, alone. The Storch trembled as wind buffeted its wings. He steadied it, adjusting the trim, eyes scanning the endless dark below. Somewhere out there lay the Rhine, and beyond it, the Allied front. He just had to find it before the fuel, or his luck ran out. The thin cockpit glass rattled in the wind as Jack Churchill guided the stolen Fiesler Storch through the night. The German countryside unfurled beneath him, a patchwork of fields, forests, and rivers veiled in mist and smoke. From above, the land looked both beautiful and haunted, the pale moonlight catching the scars of war, bombed train lines, cratered roads, burned-out villages. The wind bit through the cracked canopy. His hands, numb from cold, clutched the control stick so tightly his knuckles whitened. Every few minutes, he glanced at the fuel gauge, the needle trembling perilously near empty. He didn't know where the hell he was. The Storch's engine coughed once, then steadied. Jack kept low, skimming the treetops to avoid radar or searchlights. The smell of oil and fuel filled the cockpit, thick and metallic. Somewhere far to the west he could see faint flashes, artillery, flickering like distant lightning. That was where he needed to go. West, always west, but there was a sound now. Distant at first, then growing louder. The low rolling thunder of aircraft engines. He craned his neck, peering through the fog, and saw them, a formation of Messerschmitt Bf 109s, slicing through the sky like hunting hawks. Luftwaffe patrols. Jack's pulse quickened. The Storch was no match, slow, unarmed, fragile. One pass and he'd be shredded. He killed the throttle slightly, dipping lower, hugging the contours of the land until the plane nearly brushed the treetops. The sound of the German fighters grew closer, engines snarling overhead. "Come on, old girl," he muttered under his breath, coaxing the Storch lower still. "Keep your head down." He flew through a shallow valley, the river glinting silver beneath him. Then, tracer fire. Bright, furious lines ripped through the air above, arcing into the dark. He jerked the stick, banking hard left. The Storch wobbled violently, its fragile frame creaking under the strain. The Messerschmitts roared overhead, missing him by meters. He could see the black crosses on their wings flashing in the moonlight. The radio in his cockpit crackled to life, German voices barking orders, sharp and urgent. They'd spotted him. Jack jammed the throttle forward. The little plane screamed in protest but responded, propeller whirring madly. The Storch wasn't fast, but it could fly low and turn tighter than anything the Luftwaffe had in the air. He weaved between trees and riverbanks, the world whipping past in a blur of dark shapes and streaks of light. For 5 long minutes, it was chaos. The chase, the gunfire, the roar of engines. Then, just as suddenly, silence. The Messerschmitts banked away, heading east, perhaps thinking the Storch had crashed or fled into the trees. Jack exhaled slowly. His heart thudded like a drum. The silence afterward was almost unbearable, the kind that pressed against the eardrums. Only the hum of the engine remained, steady and fragile. He checked the compass again. Still shaking, useless. He tried to remember the geography from training, rivers flowing west toward the Rhine, towns along the Ruhr Valley, the shape of Germany's spine. He had to be somewhere north of Magdeburg now. Maybe closer to Hanover, maybe. A faint light flickered on the horizon, not red like artillery this time, but soft orange glows. Fires from bombed-out cities, he thought, or maybe Allied lines. His gut twisted. If he guessed wrong, he'd end up flying straight into a German flak zone. He looked down at his wristwatch, cracked, still ticking. 2:17 hours. If he didn't land soon, he'd fall out of the sky. He scanned the landscape desperately, then saw it, a wide meadow near a dark forest, flat and glistening faintly with dew. It would have to do. He circled once, checking for obstacles. No lights, no buildings, just open ground. Jack lined up the approach, throttled back gently, and let the Storch descend. The plane shuddered as it hit the grass, bounced once, twice, then skidded to a stop with a soft hiss of wet earth. The engine coughed and died. The night swallowed him. For a moment there was only silence and the rasp of his own breath. Then from the forest edge came voices, German voices. He froze, a patrol, maybe farmers, maybe soldiers. Either way, not friendly. He reached for the flare gun in the side compartment, half for defense, half for light. The footsteps grew louder, boots crunching frost. Flashlights flickered between the trees, slicing through the fog. Halt! We're there? Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. He kicked open the canopy, rolled out into the wet grass, and sprinted toward the trees. Shouts erupted behind him, followed by the crack of rifles. Bullets whistled past, splintering branches. He ran blind through the forest, ducking and weaving, the cold air burning his lungs. The flare gun slipped from his hand. He didn't stop. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time lost all meaning. Finally, he stumbled into a hollow beneath a fallen pine, gasping, his whole body shaking. He could still hear distant shouts, but they were fading. He'd escaped again barely. But his stolen plane now sat in a German field, a beacon for every patrol in the area. They'd be searching for him come dawn, and the front lines were still far away. Jack wiped the mud from his face, looked westward through the dark forest, and whispered to himself, "You've made it this far. Keep moving." He pushed himself to his feet, the forest stretching endlessly ahead, and began walking toward a distant horizon he couldn't see. Dawn broke like a wound across the horizon, thin red light bleeding through the fog. The forest around Jack Churchill was silent except for the cawing of distant crows and the drip of thawing frost from the pines. He was exhausted, filthy, and hungry, his uniform stiff with mud. His boots were soaked through. Every step felt like walking on knives. He had no food, no map, and no weapon beyond his wits. But he was alive and free for now. The torch he'd stolen was likely already found by morning patrols. They would search the nearby villages, the roads, every rail line west of Magdeburg. Posters with his face, his uniform, his rank, all would spread across the region within hours. The Luftwaffe would not forgive a captured RAF officer who humiliated them by stealing one of their own planes. Still he walked. The woods thinned into open country, long rolling fields dusted with frost, smoke curling from chimneys in the distance. He crouched behind a hedgerow, scanning the horizon. A road cut across the land below, leading west toward a small town. Carts rattled by, a few German soldiers on bicycles, rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. Civilians trudged along with bundles on their backs. Refugees perhaps fleeing the advancing Allies. If he could blend in, even for a day, he might slip past unnoticed. Jack tore a strip from his tattered RAF undershirt and wrapped it around his neck like a scarf, covering the insignia on his tunic. He rubbed mud into the fabric to dull the color. Then, keeping his head low, he joined the flow of people along the road, limping slightly to mask his stride. For hours he walked among them. The smell of sweat, damp wool, and fear hung heavy in the cold air. No one spoke much. When soldiers passed, everyone looked down. Jack mimicked their silence, heart pounding each time a truck rumbled by, each time a German officer's gaze swept across the crowd. The town came into view by late morning, a collection of stone houses, a church spire, a rail yard to the south. Smoke rose from a locomotive idling on the tracks, the hiss of steam drifting through the square. Somewhere a child cried. Somewhere else, a radio blared Goebbels' latest speech, muffled and tinny. Jack ducked into an alley, breathing hard. He needed food, he needed direction, and he needed to find the Rhine fast. Behind a bakery, he found a half-rotten crate of potatoes discarded by the door. He grabbed two, shoving them into his pocket, then slipped deeper into the alleyways. A few villagers passed him without a glance. He kept his eyes down. At the edge of the square, a notice board displayed the latest communiques from the Wehrmacht. Among the pages was a single poster, edges still damp from paste. RAF pilot escaped POW camp. Reward for capture. It was him. The photograph, grainy, taken months earlier during interrogation, showed his unmistakable jawline, his uniform, the cold defiance in his eyes. He tore it down quickly, crumpled it in his fist, and kept walking. By afternoon, the sky turned a dull iron gray. Snow began to fall in lazy flakes. Jack found a derelict barn at the outskirts of the town and crawled inside, curling beneath a stack of hay. For the first time in days, he let his body collapse. The exhaustion hit him like a wave, deep, bone-heavy fatigue that threatened to drown him. But he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the searchlights sweeping across the POW camp. The gunfire behind the plane, the flares in the night sky. He turned on his side, staring through a gap in the boards. Across the field, he saw the distant glow of the western horizon, faint orange flashes that pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, artillery. The front wasn't far. The next day, he stole a bicycle from outside a farmhouse. It was old, rusted, one tire half flat, but it moved faster than his legs could carry him. He pedaled through snow and wind, keeping the back roads and forest trails. Each night, he found a new place to hide, barns, ditches, the ruins of bombed houses. On the third day, he crossed a river marked by a shattered bridge. Dead horses lay frozen on the banks, their harnesses twisted in wire. The air smelled of gunpowder and decay. He pushed onward. By the sixth day, he began seeing Allied aircraft overhead, Typhoons and Mustangs streaking across the clouds, their silver fuselages flashing in the sun. Once he even heard distant tank fire, the deep, rolling thunder of the front line. Freedom was near. But so were the Germans. Late that afternoon, as he rode along a country lane flanked by bare oaks, he heard an engine behind him, a truck. He didn't turn, it slowed, voices shouted. Then came the crunch of tires as it stopped. Halt! He looked back. Two Wehrmacht soldiers jumping down from the back of a supply truck, rifles raised. His heart stopped. He dropped the bicycle and ran. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. He zigzagged across the road, dove into a ditch, and rolled into the underbrush. More shouts, more gunfire. One round tore through his sleeve. Another hit the ground beside his boot. He didn't feel the pain, only adrenaline. Jack crawled through a thicket, mud streaking his face until the gunfire faded behind him. He didn't stop until he reached a creek and waded through its freezing water to mask his tracks. When he finally collapsed on the far bank, gasping for air, he looked up and saw it. A signpost. Bent, bullet-pocked. The letters were faint but unmistakable. Akin to 20 kilometers. He was close. Closer than he'd ever been. Jack Churchill stared westward, the wind howling through the trees, and whispered hoarsely, "Almost home." Night fell like a veil over the western countryside of Germany. The sky pulsed with distant thunder, not from storms but from artillery. Every few minutes, the horizon lit up in pale flashes, followed by a low, rolling echo that trembled through the ground. Lieutenant Jack Churchill moved cautiously through the dark woods, each blast a grim reminder that he was nearing the front. He was shivering uncontrollably now. His RAF uniform, already in tatters, clung to his skin like cold paper. His lips were split, his fingers blistered from frost and rope burns. But his eyes still burned with the same fierce will that had carried him this far. The last signpost had said Aachen to 20 kilometers. That meant he was close to the western edge of Nazi Germany, to where British and American forces had been hammering through the Siegfried Line for weeks. If he could make it there, if he could cross that last stretch, he'd be free. But between him and the Allies lay chaos. Burned villages, retreating Wehrmacht units, patrols searching for deserters and spies. And the worst danger of all, friendly fire. To the Allies, a man walking out of the fog in a German uniform, even a stolen one, would look like the enemy. He had to reach them carefully, slowly. The moon rose high, silvering the treetops. Jack followed the distant rumble of battle like a compass, moving westward through open fields and over frozen streams. Occasionally, he saw movement ahead, silhouettes of German soldiers retreating in small groups, their morale shattered, their eyes hollow. He avoided them all, staying low, crawling through ditches, holding his breath as boots and voices passed meters away. Once, he stumbled upon a wrecked convoy, trucks torn apart by rocket fire, corpses frozen where they'd fallen. The stench of fuel and burned flesh filled the air. Jack searched the bodies with trembling hands and found what he needed, a canteen of water, a map stained with oil, and a Luftwaffe officer's jacket. He slipped it on, ignoring the rank insignia. It was warm, and warmth meant survival. As dawn approached, he reached the outskirts of a small village. Roofs blown open by shellfire. Windows shattered. A church steeple leaned drunkenly against the sky. No one was left alive, only the wind moving through empty doorways. He crept through the ruins, searching for signs of direction. On one wall, half-charred, he saw a painted arrow. West, Aachen. He smiled weakly. His cracked lips bled. Then, voices. German, urgent, close. Jack dropped behind a collapsed wall, heart hammering. Through a hole in the rubble, he saw them. 5 Wehrmacht soldiers, mud-caked and exhausted, leading a truck loaded with supplies. They were arguing, one shouting about the Americans, another insisting the road was cut off. One soldier broke off and approached the ruin Jack was hiding behind, lighting a cigarette. The match flared, illuminating his face, young, maybe 19, eyes sunken with fear. Jack froze. The soldier turned his head at a sound, a crunch of frost underfoot, and his eyes widened. "Halt! Jack lunged before he could finish. He tackled the boy into the wall, the cigarette flying into the snow. They struggled, fists, boots, a muffled cry, and then silence. Jack stared down at the motionless figure, chest heaving. He hadn't meant to kill him, but there was no time for guilt. He dragged the body behind the wall, grabbed the soldier's rifle, and slipped away before the others noticed. He moved faster now, guided by the growing thunder ahead. The artillery was close, so close the air trembled with each impact. He could smell cordite and burning oil, feel the faint tremor of tanks rolling miles away. Then, as he crested a ridge, the world opened up before him, a vast scarred plain stretching westward. Trenches, craters, barbed wire, and far in the distance, the faint flicker of Allied flares painting the sky green and red. His breath caught in his throat. That was it. The Allied line. He took one step forward, then froze. Machine gun fire rattled from somewhere below. German positions still held the ridge between him and the front. Dozens of men, maybe more, dug in along the trench network. The entire slope was alive with muzzle flashes and shouting. Between bursts, he could hear the heavy thump of mortar and the scream of incoming shells. If he tried to cross in daylight, he'd be cut down instantly. Jack backed away from the ridge, heart pounding, and dropped into a shell hole for cover. He'd wait for nightfall. He'd move under the dark, slip through the lines, and signal the Allies before they shot him. He sat there for hours, cold and still, as the sun crawled across the gray sky. Shells fell intermittently, shaking the ground. He stared west, counting the distance. 1/2 mile, maybe less. So close. so impossibly close. When darkness came again, he crawled from the crater and began to move. The snow had returned, falling silently across the ruined landscape. The only light came from the intermittent flashes of artillery fire. He moved like a ghost, 1 foot, 1 breath, 1 prayer at a time. The trench line was just ahead now. He could hear the Germans talking, laughing nervously, boots clinking on frozen metal. He waited until another barrage lit the sky, then sprinted. Bullets whined past him, men shouted. Someone fired a flare that illuminated the entire ridge in harsh white light. Jack dove, rolled, crawled through the wire, the sharp barbs tearing at his jacket. Then, open ground. The no man's land between the lines. He didn't look back. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs felt like lead, until the ground ahead erupted in firelight and he saw dark shapes rising, helmets, rifles, shouts in English. "Hold fire!" someone yelled. "He's unarmed!" Jack stumbled, fell to his knees, and raised his hands. His voice cracked as he shouted the only words that mattered. "I'm RAF. British Air Force. Don't shoot." A flashlight beam hit his face. For a long moment, there was only the sound of wind and distant guns. Then a voice, steady, disbelieving. "Bloody hell. He's one of ours." Jack Churchill collapsed into the snow, sobbing with relief. March 22, 1944. Luftwaffe Airfield, Heiligenbeil, East Prussia. A frozen fog rolled over the airstrip like the breath of ghosts. Every surface glittered with frost, and the silhouettes of abandoned aircraft loomed through the mist. Focke-Wulfs, Messerschmitts, and a few light reconnaissance planes, their wings stiff under sheets of ice. In the pre-dawn stillness, only the faint hum of a generator broke the silence. From the tree line beyond the perimeter fence, a lone figure crept forward, mud-stained, trembling, and half-starved. Jack Churchill had walked nearly 50 miles since escaping his work detachment. His RAF uniform was gone, replaced with a patchwork of stolen German clothing, a Luftwaffe overcoat barely holding together. But in his hand, tucked beneath his sleeve, he still carried his compass, his only link to home. He had no map, no rations, no plan left, except one. Ahead of him, beyond a cluster of snow-covered fuel drums, sat a small aircraft with its nose angled toward the open field. A Fieseler Fi-156 Storch, the Luftwaffe's nimble reconnaissance plane, capable of short takeoffs and landings. Its long, spindly landing gear looked like that of a stork mid-step, hence the name. And it was fueled. Jack crouched behind a broken crate, staring at it. The idea was absurd suicide even, but so was staying here. The Gestapo had flooded every road, and the front was chaos. Flying was his only chance. A truck engine coughed somewhere near the hangars. 2 mechanics emerged, their breath visible in the cold, chatting as they checked the aircraft line. Jack pressed lower into the mud. One of the men lit a cigarette, leaning on the Storch's cowling, tapping ash onto the wing. "Verdammt kalt," one muttered, shaking his hands for warmth. They moved off toward the mess hut, leaving the Storch alone. Jack's pulse thundered in his ears. He waited 1 minute, 2, until their voices faded behind the hangars. Then he ran. He sprinted across the frostbitten tarmac, boots barely making a sound, breath short and sharp. The Storch loomed above him like salvation. The cockpit canopy was half open, frost crystals coating the glass. He yanked the door open and climbed in. Everything was in German, the gauges, the labels, the fuel selector, but his RAF training kicked in. A plane was a plane. He could fly this. He checked the throttle, half fuel. Enough for an hour, maybe 2. He switched on the magnetos, pumped the primer, and muttered under his breath, "Come on, sweetheart. Don't fail me now." Outside, the first gray light of dawn was bleeding across the horizon. He hit the starter. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life, a sharp mechanical scream tearing through the cold. The noise split the morning silence. From across the airfield, a German shouted, "Halt! Was Max du Deal?" Jack shoved the throttle forward. The Storch lurched, wheels cutting across the frozen grass. Bullets cracked through the air, sparking off the fuselage. A guard tower searchlight swung toward him. "God, come on," the engine howled. The Storch bounced once, twice, then lifted. He was airborne. Tracer fire stitched the sky behind him, red threads chasing into the mist. Jack ducked instinctively, gripping the stick. The plane climbed sluggishly, its wings trembling under the strain. Below, soldiers ran across the field, rifles flashing in the dim light. But the fog swallowed them quickly, and soon the sound of gunfire faded into silence. For a moment, a fleeting, unreal moment, Jack Churchill was free. The Storch sliced through the low clouds, its engine a steady hum. Beneath him stretched the frozen wastelands of East Prussia, forests like black veins, rivers glinting silver in the dawn. He had no radio, no navigation instruments beyond the compass he clutched in his coat pocket. The wind howled through the cracked canopy. He flew west. Hours passed in a blur of white sky and desolate land. He saw columns of German vehicles below, retreating convoys, endless lines of smoke and desperation. The Reich was collapsing, though no one would admit it yet. Then, in the far distance, he saw the front. The scar of war cutting through Europe, explosions bloomed like thunderclouds. Anti-aircraft bursts dotted the sky. He knew the Allies were somewhere beyond that chaos, but crossing it meant threading a needle through death itself. He checked his fuel, barely a quarter tank left. "Almost there," he whispered. "Just a bit more." He descended, hugging the treetops. Gunfire echoed in the distance, German flak batteries firing at unseen targets. He banked sharply to avoid a column of smoke. The Storch shuddered but held steady. Below, he saw trenches, fields torn by artillery, and faintly, the unmistakable sight of Allied vehicles. Jeeps, half-tracks, soldiers waving a White Star flag. Home. Jack Churchill took a breath that felt like his first in months. He waggled the Storch's wings, then brought it down, wheels scraping through a muddy clearing, snow flying in all directions. The landing was rough, but the plane held. He skidded to a stop, engine sputtering out. A group of American soldiers ran toward him, weapons raised. Jack threw open the canopy, raised his hands, and shouted in perfect English, "Don't shoot!" Royal Air Force. The Americans froze, disbelief plastered across their faces. One finally lowered his rifle. "Jesus Christ! He's one of ours." Jack climbed down, his legs shaking. He looked back at the Storch, the stolen wings that had carried him out of hell, and smiled faintly. He'd done it, alone. "Bloody good bird," he muttered. The Americans led him away, still stunned. Behind them, the sun rose over the battlefield, catching the frost on the Storch's wings, a glimmer of gold amid the ruin. Jack Churchill, the man who stole a Nazi plane and flew it to freedom, vanished into legend that day. One man against an empire, carried home on wings he was never meant to touch.